So today we're going to talk about a battle that happened right after one of the biggest victories in early Islamic history. And it's just this incredible story of how supreme confidence can curdle into arrogance, how a massive army can be shattered in minutes, and maybe most importantly, how just a handful of people can turn certain defeat into a legendary victory.
And that really is the central question for us today. I mean, think about it. How does an army of 12,000 soldiers at the absolute peak of its power and morale just break and run? The answer to that mystery is found in a valley called Hunayn. All right, let's get into it.
So, let's set the scene. The year is 630 CE. The Prophet Muhammad and his followers have just accomplished the unthinkable, the peaceful conquest of Mecca. There was no big fight, no revenge. Instead, a message of total peace and security was announced for everyone.
Now, this is what's so amazing. This wasn't the kind of speech you'd expect from a conqueror, right? This was a blanket amnesty. And this act of mercy, it just cemented the victory and brought this incredible sense of peace to a city that had been the center of opposition for years.
But, while Mecca was breathing this sigh of relief, other tribes nearby were watching, and they were getting nervous. The powerful Khawazin and Sakif tribes, while they saw the Muslim success as a direct threat to their own power, their whole way of life, and they decided they had to act, and they had to act right now.
So they started gathering their forces. And the Khawazin alliance put together this truly massive army in a place called Al-Audis. The estimated strength, get this, up to 20,000 fighters. This was a huge deal, way bigger than the force the Muslims had just faced. Okay, so let's just break down the two sides. You've got the Muslim army, 12,000 strong, a mix of veterans and new converts, and they are riding high on their success, feeling pretty good about their numbers. Then you've got the Khawazin alliance. They're bigger, and they're so determined that they made this crazy high-stakes gamble. They brought their families and all their property with them. This was a mind game, right? It was designed to make their soldiers fight literally to the death to protect everything and everyone they loved. So, hearing about this new threat, the Prophet Muhammad gathers his army and they march out. But as they headed toward the Valley of Hunayn, the army was falling into a classic trap. You could call it the victor's paradox. Their own success, the very thing that made them so strong, was now creating this dangerous feeling that they were basically invincible. And you can actually see this attitude reflected in the sources. With 12,000 soldiers, the biggest army they had ever assembled, some of them were thinking, there's no way we can lose. Their own strength became their biggest blind spot. This vanity, this idea that just having the numbers meant victory was guaranteed, well, it was about to become their greatest weakness.
And this just shows you how brilliant the Khawazin plan was. At dawn, still dark, the front of the Muslim army enters this narrow valley. The Khawazin were waiting, totally hidden on the high ground. And then they just unleashed a perfectly timed storm of arrows. The vanguard was trapped in a bottleneck, nowhere to go, and they broke. They turned and fled right back into the main army, and their own numbers suddenly became a problem, creating this massive domino effect of absolute chaos and panic.
I mean, in just a few moments, the entire army just imploded. That confidence? Gone. It was replaced by pure primal fear. All their discipline, their structure, it just dissolved. What was supposed to be a show of force had turned into a desperate, stampeding retreat. Defeat wasn't just on the table, it was actually happening.
But the battle wasn't over, not even close. Because while thousands were running for their lives, a small group did not break. And this right here was the turning point. This is where the sheer force of will of a few people completely changed the fate of the entire army.
So who was left standing? Well, the Prophet himself, who refused to move an inch. With him were just a handful of his closest companions, the early immigrants from Mecca, the Muhajirin, the helpers from Medina, the Ansar, and some of his own family members. We're talking maybe 100 people total, standing firm against the enemy and the stampede of their own army.
In the middle of all that noise and confusion, the Prophet's voice just cut through it all like an anchor. He didn't run. He stood his ground, calling out, reminding his men who he was and what they were there for. It was just this incredible act of courage in the face of total collapse, creating one single point of stability in all the chaos.
And then he told his uncle, Abbas, who was famous for his booming voice, to shout a very specific call. He was reminding the fleeing Ansar of a famous oath of loyalty they had all taken years before. This wasn't just yelling, it was a targeted strike, an appeal to their honor, their identity, and a promise they had made. And you know what? It worked. Hearing those calls, soldiers started to hesitate. The frantic retreat slowed down.
You can almost picture it, right? Men turning their heads, their sense of duty starting to win the battle against their fear. First one by one, then in small groups. They began to turn back toward that tiny island of calm in the middle of the storm.
What happened next was just one of the most incredible turnarounds you'll ever hear about. This wasn't just about getting back into formation. It was a psychological reboot of the army's will to fight. The same soldiers who had been fleeing for their lives just moments before, they rallied around the Prophet and launched this absolutely ferocious counterattack. The entire momentum of the battle just flipped on a dime.
Now, the sources frame this moment in really powerful spiritual terms. The Quran talks about a tranquility coming down on the believers which calm their fears. And it even mentions unseen armies helping them. For the fighters on the ground, this must have felt like a massive surge of fresh courage and unshakable belief that they could win.
And here's a really cool detail. As the counterattack reached its peak, the Prophet used this phrase. He said, "This is the time when the tandoor is on fire." A tandoor, is a clay oven. He was basically saying, now the heat is on. The fight is at its hottest. It's such a raw, vivid metaphor that just perfectly captures the intensity of that comeback. The Khawazin, who probably thought they had already won this brilliant victory, were completely blindsided by this sudden, furious assault. In a perfect reversal of how the battle started, their lines shattered, and now they were the ones who broke and ran, leaving behind everything and everyone they had brought to the battlefield. So here's the key takeaway, and it's laid out perfectly for us. The Quranic verses about this battle basically diagnose the problem and give the solution. Before the battle, their big numbers made them vain, and it led to disaster. Victory only happened after they swapped that vanity for humility and true resolve. It was this powerful, unforgettable lesson that real strength isn't just about a head count.
And that really brings us to our final thought here. The Battle of Hunayn isn't just some old story. It's a perfect case study on that razor-thin line between the confidence you need to win and the vanity that basically guarantees you'll lose. It's a timeless lesson on how quickly one can poison the other, and how your true strength is never tested when things are easy, but only